This video is going to be my reaction to the Lions' 31-29 win over the Minnesota Vikings in Week 7 on the road. It was a win that was incredibly exciting to watch and competitive. These two teams are well matched, if you ask me. As a Lions fan, go back and watch it a second time. You'll probably enjoy it more than you did the first time. So it really illustrates how tough and gritty this Detroit Lions team is. This is going to be a difficult division to navigate. I think this game also offers us some clues as to how challenging it's going to be to go through this division and play road games and home games against the same three teams, the Vikings, Packers, and the Bears, who have all improved. They're trying to match what the Lions established and put together last year in 2023. Look, they came back today from a 10-point deficit with just an offensive onslaught in the second quarter. And then just to be able to shift gears, I think, after falling behind again in the fourth quarter on that shocking fumble by David Montgomery, to be able to shift gears and go into basically slowdown mode in the last two and a half to 3 minutes on offense, come back and win on Jake Bates' 44-yard field goal with 15 seconds left. Yes, they're tough, but their coaching staff is also incredibly smart, just in the way they played that situation at the end, in my opinion, but also with how Dan Campbell displays faith and confidence in his players, namely Jake Bates. They were going to win or lose the game on a field goal. They weren't worried about scoring a touchdown at all. I think there's some brilliance there in terms of the way they handled it, but ultimately today has to be on some level about Jared Goff. Look, he did miss a big throw up the left sideline to Khalif Raymond, and I thought Raymond tormented the Vikings DBs when they played man. There's a lot of zone being played by Minnesota. I do have some long-term concerns or ideas about how they're going to match up with teams the rest of the year. If they cannot match up in man hardly at all, and you pretty much can whittle down what you're going to get after watching the game live, definitely saw a lot more zone, and Goff exploited it, in my opinion. He was 22 of 25 passing, 280 yards, 2 touchdowns. Again, the only pass that he missed, it could have been a big play, probably should have, was the long throw up the left sideline to Raymond. Andrew Van Ginkel kind of forces him off his spot, disrupts the flow or the creation of the play. At this point, I think you have to admit Ben Johnson and Jared Goff have solved Brian Flores' defense. If you didn't know it before today, you do now. Now, having said that, both teams were actually very efficient on offense. Detroit 7 yards per play overall today, and the Vikings 7.4 yards per play, respectively. Besides Goff going 22 of 25, Sam Darnold was also 22 of 27. They both looked in control for much of the day. I do have to say this, were it not for the fumble by Montgomery in the fourth quarter, I think the Vikings were very fortunate to get that. I don't think this game requires a last-second field goal from Bates, and that's what illustrates to me the toughness that they have on that team, offensively and defensively, throughout the roster, being able to fall behind 10-0 against one of the top 3 scoring defenses in the league, give away the lead, essentially, with the fumble that Ivan Pace returns to the house to make it 29-28 Vikings. Getting back on the field on defense immediately on the 2-point conversion and getting a stop was huge, obviously, because then that allows Bates' field goal to win it. I think it was an interesting strategy. Greg Olsen I think he recognized it a little sooner than he explained on the broadcast. It was after Gibbs' 16-yard catch up the right side that he started to point out that this is a strategy that they're employing. This is the right strategy. They went into slowdown mode basically with, I think, 2:32 or 2:34 left. I think it's kind of genius because oftentimes in those situations, teams they're whittling down or slimming down the playbook, basically by throwing the ball almost exclusively. Detroit went the opposite direction. They did what the Ravens often do. They zigged when everybody else zags. Everybody knows you're going to pass. Instead, they go Gibbs for 4 yards, and then they let the clock run down to the 2-minute warning. That's a clue right there, if you ask me. But the Vikings didn't take the clue because out of the 2-minute warning, the very next snap, about 3 minutes of actual real time later, Vikings are still in a too-high look, and they get shredded for 14 yards, like a slicing run where he kind of weaves to the right, to the left, and then back out near midfield, I think to the 48-yard line. Brilliant call, if you ask me. And then they run the clock down again to 1:30. Goff finds Gibbs in the right flats for 16 yards, get the ball in. At that point, realistic field goal range, but they didn't have enough. They were out of bounds on the snap or on the finish of the play, Gibbs was out of bounds. So to find St. Brown, just a warrior, man. The guy is just something special. He makes a catch, a tough catch, with the safety Smith to his inside position, and I think a corner outside. Goff put the ball right there. Huge 14-yard reception. Put the Vikings in a bind. Well, actually, made them realize that it was going to come down to a field goal at that point. Dan Campbell understood, in my opinion, this is where I'm talking about the intelligence of the coaching staff. I believe that Dan Campbell understood that 3 kneel downs at that point, after the reception to St. Brown, were not going to be enough. They would not take up enough time. So he was going for one more snap. That's the run to Gibbs. It's a 0-yard gain. And basically that 5 seconds that it took for Gibbs to run the ball, he didn't actually gain a yard. I think it was critical to the strategy that Campbell and those guys wanted to employ. Basically, the Vikings would call a timeout after the 2 kneel downs, preserve as much time as they could. Bates does drill it from 44 yards. I'm saying 3 plays prior to that, Campbell and his staff had done the math and said, if we can get it, if we can take a little bit more time off, I think it went from 107 to 102 on Gibbs' first down run, which gained 0 yards. That put the Vikings in a position 3 or 4 plays later, when they do finally get the ball in their hands, to only have 15 seconds left on the clock. I think it's brilliant strategy there. I would have been fine also if on the kickoff they actually kicked it into the, quote, landing zone and forced the Vikings to try to bring the ball out and use some of that 15 seconds. I understand Minnesota fans may not like hearing this if they've listened this long, first of all. They were 5-0, and they had the number 3 ranked defense in terms of points per game allowed. There's a lot of things that went the Vikings' way today. And Detroit was still able to go in there and really seize control with 4 consecutive touchdowns on 4 straight possessions, and then go ahead and get the game-winning field goal when they needed it, down 29-28. They took a 10-0 lead, and then the bottom fell out for Minnesota's defense. Goff and Ben Johnson put on a clinic, if you ask me. It really looked like the 2 games in 2023, where they were able to post 30 points in each of their wins. Great start for the Vikings defense today was absolutely ruined by Detroit's offensive efficiency, their balanced play calling. Look, after, I should say 3 consecutive stops, there was the failed punt on the first play, first possession, then 2 stops. And after falling behind 10-0, here's what Detroit does on the ensuing 3 possessions. They go 5 plays, 69 yards, touchdown. That's on Gibbs' beautiful 45-yard run up the right side. At that point, when I saw it, I was like, that looked too easy. Something doesn't look right there in terms of the resistance that Minnesota had put up against the run. Of course, they were number 2 run defense in the NFL. 45 yards allowed on 1 play for a touchdown to make it 10-7. Second possession in a row where they score. Lions go 5 plays, 83 yards. That's the touchdown on the 35-yard strike to St. Brown up the right hash. I thought Goff played the Vikings sticks blitz 0 like a fiddle. I'll definitely do a One Play Wednesday video on that touchdown to Branch, or to St. Brown up the right hash. And then Branch gets a ridiculous interception. I thought Branch played a whale of a football game today. I think he only finished with 4 tackles, 2 passes defense, an interception. Also had the fumble recovery for a touchdown. That really nearly finished the game in the third quarter, if you ask me. It would have been 28-10 after that. But anyway, Branch's interception comes on a 2nd and 8 in the second quarter. Darnold was targeting Jordan Addison. Branch played it perfectly. Jumping interception that changed the momentum of the overall game. But really, if you were watching, you understood that Detroit's offense versus the Vikings defense, that dynamic was already pretty much concluded at absent turnovers. On the next drive, again, up 14-10. At that point, after Branch's interception, Goff goes 3 of 3 on the drive. Gibbs runs the ball in from the 8-yard line on a 3rd and 7. Just a masterful play calling. The Lions only faced 1 third down on that drive. It's their 6th drive. Again, I'm explaining to you that at that point, I think the tactical battle was pretty much over. And if you think I'm overstating it, listen to the play sequence there after Branch's interception. They get the ball back up 14-10. You got Gibbs for an 8-yard run. Gibbs for an 18-yard reception. Gibbs for an 8-yard run. On a 2nd and 2, St. Brown with a 3-yard catch. That's what the play called for. A shoot route out into the flats. A loss of 1 on a run by Montgomery, and then Laporta for 25 yards. I think 3 plays later, Gibbs on a simple inside zone concept. There's no one there. It's not a tricky run concept. It's not a trap. I do think that they left the D end unblocked and kind of pinned him down. Gibbs actually didn't run outside of him, which is what makes it a little bit unique or unusual. But look, the Vikings defense deserves credit for what they came into today doing. I think forced 13 turnovers coming into the game. They got the one in the fourth quarter to change the momentum, convert it to a touchdown. But the way that the Vikings defense, Brian Flores' structure, relates to this Lions offense, so much zone being played, fight fire with fire if you want to, it's just not working at this point. The Lions have scored 91 points in 3 games against that defense. Something's going to have to change from a Vikings perspective in terms of the way they do things on defense, and I'm not sure that they are tactically able to play more man without running themselves into difficulty and giving up more big plays. I understand others may have a different perspective. I make halftime notes and then I read them out here, and so I want to read them just so you can get an idea of why my perspective is so heavy and so adamant about the balance of the relationship between the Lions offense and the Vikings defense that's going to play well against the rest of the league. Don't get me wrong. Brian Flores does 2 things that I think the rest of the league really don't necessarily understand. But look, at halftime, the Lions are up 21-10 with 3 incredible drives in the second quarter. The brilliant defensive play by Branch was sandwiched in between 2 of them. Detroit got the passing game going in the second quarter, like I said, after falling behind 10-0. Montgomery went down. I think Pascal went down. It looked like to me in the first quarter, mid-first quarter, St. Brown went down after a play was maybe shaken up. I thought I saw him off for a couple of plays in the second half with his helmet off. They called timeout, brought him back on. Gibbs' 45-yard run came at the right time, if you ask me. Maybe they go down and score anyway, but it was a shocking display of what he can do. Montgomery's had a fantastic season so far, and him getting hurt and going out of the game and then coming back just shows you how dedicated he is to the team and how tough he is. But Gibbs' performance today was something that Montgomery can't do, in my opinion. Yes, he did have the 40-yard touchdown, 40-yard catch against the Seahawks where he ran over Devin Witherspoon, and he had some big runs, obviously, in overtime against the Rams, and he's off to a really fantastic start to this year. But Gibbs on that 45-yard run showed that you literally, as a defense, cannot afford him the type of space that they did. Goff at the half was 12 of 12 passing, 156 yards, 1 touchdown, including, like I said, the 35-yard touchdown to St. Brown, put him up 14-10. I think that was on a 2nd and 11. The Vikings are showing like sticks coverage, so they've got a bunch of guys up near the line of scrimmage, I think 7, maybe 8, and 3 or 4 DBs at the line to gain, basically 2nd and 11. Their heels are at 11 yards. And he motions Tim Patrick left to right to help hold the defensive end to the right side. Brilliant job by Goff of recognizing what was coming or what the Vikings could do, because sometimes they line up that way and they drop out. Additional to that, the running back, I think, was trying to help out. They have exploited that high-pressure scheme that Flores has played. Flores has played it for years, in fact. Goff, I think, knew where he was going with the football on that play, and Greg Olsen did a nice job today generally. He identified that. That throw made it 14-10. Like I said, they end up 21-10 at the half. At that point, Darnold is also 9 of 12 passing, but it was only for 75 yards. To that point, Detroit had outgained the Vikings 244 to 166. Despite Minnesota averaging 6.9 yards per play, Detroit was at 8.4 in the first half. Incredible. Run game, almost 100 yards through 30 minutes, 97 yards to be precise. I guess that was a little misleading because of Gibbs' 45-yard run. He did add the 8-yard touchdown run, like I said, that put him up 21-10 with a little bit less than 31 seconds left in the half. To that point, Minnesota had the one big run by Aaron Jones, 34 yards to take a 7-0 lead. 91 yards on 12 carries. Darnold also had a 19-yard scramble in there. I still don't think that Minnesota is going to be able to run the ball consistently against Detroit's defense. Nonetheless, they did end up with, I think, 137 today, something like that. So credit to Minnesota for keeping pace when Detroit's offense was basically on a roll and unstoppable for 4 possessions in a row. The teams exchanged touchdown drives to open the third quarter. Branch's fumble recovery would have made it 28-10. To me, it looked like CD3 he did force a fumble, but I guess it was ruled that the receiver's foot was out of bounds. From the first replay angle I saw, I was like, oh, the receiver's foot's out of bounds. Then they showed another angle that it looked like his heel was off the ground. the ball comes out, and then the second foot comes down out of bounds, which would blow the play dead. That's the explanation I got on the stream I was watching. I don't know necessarily if that was a national broadcast. I would presume it is, since Greg Olson was a part of it. That was the explanation I received. The wide receiver might have been out of bounds after the strip, meaning it was a dead ball where it occurred. And then the refs come back and say there was no fumble that occurred. And if you look at the statistical designation, there wasn't. So that could have been, a knockout blow about 20 minutes of gameplay after Detroit was down 10-0. Really ridiculous. And then credit to Sam Darnold. He made 2 great throws today. The one to cap this drive, first drive of the third quarter, I didn't think it was a great throw. It was a poor coverage choice by Aaron Glenn. It's a 3rd and 8. They go trips. They put Jefferson in the slot as a number 3 receiver. And it's just like a wheel route up the left sideline. I'm not sure that Robertson can really do much against it. It's a lot to ask of him, let's put it that way, in that particular matchup. The only guy I could see defending it from that slot position, Branch, with his unique combination of size and athleticism and timing as well, maybe CD3. If he's able to use his physicality to shut down the route and not draw a flag. And the crazy thing about this Detroit team is, after allowing that touchdown that lets Minnesota get closer, I think 21-17 at that point, they pretty much go right downfield and make it 28-17. At that point, for me at least, I was like, okay, they are absolutely in charge. And what the thing that, and my impression here could be wrong, we'll find out when I watch the All-22 angle later tonight or early Monday morning. I thought that Minnesota played a little bit more man here on this possession and paid for it. Great catch first by Montgomery on the first play of the drive. Ends up being a 14-yard gain. A little bit high from Goff, but I thought Goff was kind of falling down, or his balance was off somewhat on the throw. 2 plays later, Montgomery, there's a hold on what I thought was just a giveaway play by Ben Johnson. As soon as they lined up in the formation, Pro Twins A, I was like, all right, this is the same side run call. I would have liked something more creative. I kept waiting for a reverse or a jet sweep, and Johnson never used it today. Raymond on a little slot out to the top side of the broadcast I had, the right side of the offense, creates a 3rd and 9, and then he wins against Gilmore. Clean. 4 yards of separation on this 3rd and 9. Goff put the throw out there. Incredible timing and accuracy by Goff. Great route from Raymond to win against a guy who still plays as a high-level corner, but maybe isn't as shut down in man defense as he used to be. Eventually gets to a 2nd and 15, and I thought this was the second great throw on this drive. It's a 2nd and 15 from the 47 after an illegal procedure penalty that I didn't see, to be honest with you, but nonetheless, Patrick on one of those Josh Reynolds routes, a dig concept, pushes the ball 21 yards down to the 26. They tried to get Williams the ball. From my perspective, I feel like the zone defense kind of limited Williams today, but I could be wrong in that regard. I would welcome feedback on that about what you think the issue was. Montgomery gets 8 yards on a run concept. He really kind of juked Pace near the line of scrimmage. Pace was downhill play. He was playing downhill today, quick downhill, and in this case, it did not work out for the Vikings because Montgomery's able to cut off of him on a 2nd and 14 from the 30, get 8 yards, create that 3rd and 6, and then Raymond underneath from trips was brilliant because the running back releases to the left, the boundary side, Gibbs. And it's kind of that classic Ben Johnson route where either the number 2 or number 3 receiver runs that drag and they can sit it down on the hash or they can keep running. In this case, he kept running. Gilmore fell down, who was covering him man. And then Gibbs, obviously he's been trained to do this, comes back on the play and blocks the only defender who would have theoretically been able to tackle Raymond, I think the guy who was guarding Gibbs, and able to scoot in for a 22-yard touchdown to make it 28-17. I thought that was an amazing answer. They take that lead 28-17 into the fourth quarter. You have the fumble by Montgomery. The Vikings are able to get a field goal. Fumble by Montgomery puts the Vikings in front. Seemed a little random. There were 2 defenders there. I feel like Montgomery's always got really great ball security, but it's a poor time for a fumble, obviously, and he can't do that. 29-28, credit to the defense. I think it was Arnold or maybe it was Branch defending Addison on the 2-point conversion play. My guess is they're probably doubling Jefferson at that point. I kind of can't wait to see it and see the All-22, but credit to the defense for being able to come on the field, a game that you had been leading 28-17, then 28-20, and suddenly you're behind after another field goal makes it 28-23, and then they score on the fumble recovery for a touchdown. to go up 29-28 in the fourth quarter, a game that I thought Detroit was in control of, and suddenly they're behind. Credit to the defense for being able to come on there. Goff did miss the big throw to Raymond that I talked about in between in the interim. But on the next possession, when they got the ball, the 11th possession, finally after the stop, I mean, it's brilliant strategy. Look, I think it's brilliant strategy. I kind of already covered it, but to retain the width or the entirety of your playbook, let me put it that way, I wouldn't have been surprised to see a reverse here, to be honest with you. Those reverses with Williams and Raymond, the guys who have the best acceleration on the team, would have been appropriate at some point today because Minnesota's a fast flow team. They get after the ball, but their edge defenders on the backside also are a little bit unpredictable. They're well trained, I think, generally, but there's times when they're also getting upfield. It just kind of depends on the call. And so my suspicion is that Ben Johnson avoided the reverses because he wasn't sure exactly what kind of reaction you would get from the backside D end. But in this case, run the ball 14 yards Gibbs at the 2-minute warning. How many offensive coordinators in the NFL, down 1, 2 minutes left, are making that play call? I guess I'm sure that there are others. But Ben Johnson is the guy who does it, along with Dan Campbell's input. I'm sure those guys are obviously on the same page. That one opened them up, got the ball to near midfield. At that point, the entire playbook is there for you, and they run the clock down, I think, to 1:30, somewhere in there, or 1:14, sorry. Pass it to Gibbs on the right side for 26 yards. Gets out of bounds, 107. I'm sorry, not 107, 112. Then the completion to St. Brown, I believe, is at the 107 mark. Again, the decision to run the ball with Gibbs on the 1st and 10 from the 22, I think is important because if they took a knee 3 times, I believe that Minnesota could stop the clock all 3 times. And you're probably looking at 24, 25 seconds left, something like that, when Minnesota's able to get the ball back. A difference that's important because a longer completion downfield allows them to get a spike off. Now, they did actually get a spike off, which was a little surprising to me, the way that worked out. I don't know about you. I still don't necessarily understand it. That I seem to recall 10-second runoff occurring during a penalty inside of 1 minute, but I could be wrong there. Could have faulty memory. Credit to Aaron Glenn for something he did on that last drive. He didn't rush anyone on the first play. He let Darnold use up as much time as possible. Now, some would say, well, Coach, on the very next play, they blitzed 3, and Nowaski, 53, hopefully I'm saying his name right, he was a blur off the edge there, gets the sack, which officially ends up being their 4th sack of the day, which is really cool. 2 of them are a little bit random. They end up almost looking like scrambles by Darnold, but I digress. I like the play call to not blitz anyone with 15 seconds left, and the Vikings holding the ball on the negative 30, 70 yards away from a potential touchdown, number 1, or 43 yards away, whatever the math is required there, to be in a legitimate field goal range for their guy. He's obviously got a big leg, maybe 33 yards. My apologies. But Nowaski finished it off with the sack. I think it's interesting that Aaron Glenn did that in that moment. Not that I expected him to play man, certainly, but he has had some quizzical, interesting decisions from a coverage standpoint before. Today was one of them. I think the need for a high-level pass rusher is obvious. I don't mean to necessarily move away from the tone and tenor of the video. The 4 sacks today kind of hides that need, in my opinion. 2 of them were by Campbell and Rodriguez, both of whom played very well, in fact, whereby Darnold is kind of shifting in the pocket, getting ready to get out of there. Nowaski finished it with a, quote, legitimate sack. It's a win against the right tackle. Pascal got a sack on a play-action concept where he's unblocked. So I do think the need for a high-level pass rusher is there, and I believe that something will get done before the trade deadline. Didn't mean to necessarily mess up the flow or cause disagreement in anyone. I understand there's different opinions out there, but to me, there's no reason why this Lions team shouldn't say, we're going to go all in, and whatever that means is what it means for me, because I think you've got the offense and the defense to get it done going into Minnesota, winning against an undefeated Vikings team that I think they will play good defense generally during the year. I wonder if their propensity to play so much zone isn't going to catch up to them at a certain point. But when you stop the run the way they do generally, it affords you those opportunities. As an aside, to talk about one thing that Flores does, and then I'll finish with a point about Goff. I love the fact that he is one of the few guys who recognizes the tactical advantage of a three-man rush. I'm not in the position to say that I think Brian Flores is the best defensive coordinator in the world. I think there's other guys who do just as good a job, if not better. But in terms of ranking defensive coordinators, I'm not interested. I'm just not one who thinks, after watching his defense 3 times against the Lions in the last, I guess, 11 months or so, say that he's got everything figured out on the defensive side of the ball. Each NFL team franchise front office has player personnel decisions to make with salary cap structure in mind. And so Flores has just as much of an opportunity to get man coverage guys in that building as other people do. And in this case, they brought in Gilmore to potentially solve that issue, in my opinion. I'm not sure that he does, just based on what I saw today in terms of the matchup against Raymond. But getting back to what one thing I really love is the three-man rush. I thought it disrupted Goff 3 separate times today. Now, one of them he turned into a completion. I believe it was a late completion to Gibbs underneath for like 4 or 6 yards, or Montgomery for like 4 or 6 yards. It did a nice job, that three-man rush, threatening a heavy blitz, dropping multiple guys out. Basically, it's an 8-man drop Tampa 2, which normally a Tampa 2 involves a 4-man rush. So I'll do a One Play Wednesday or maybe a standalone film study video about that. It's very rare for other defensive coordinators in the NFL to utilize that as much as they do. Lou Anarumo of the Bengals did a fantastic job of it 2 years in a row in their playoff games against the Chiefs, 2021 and 2022. So in any case, credit to Glenn for the way he handled that last possession. Maybe Dan Campbell was heavily involved. If you look at the scores of these last 3 games, you got very competitive games. 31-29 today, 30-24 in Minnesota on the road last year on Christmas Eve, and then 30-20 at home 2 weeks later. You have a scoring differential of 91-73 over the course of 180 minutes of gameplay. These two teams are fun to watch. They're fun to watch compete against each other. My final point here, I'm not a person who only focuses on quarterbacks. If you guys watch my content, you probably understand that I think the game requires a little bit more widespread evaluation than just quarterbacks, but you have to discuss Goff's performance recently. And I held it until the end intentionally because I suspect that some people aren't going to like one of my points. Getting to the topic of bridge quarterbacks a little bit, it's going to be fun to see how Sam Darnold finishes the year. I would almost say there's some similarities between Darnold being looked at in the same manner that Goff was when he came to Detroit. The only difference, obviously, is that Goff had taken his team to a Super Bowl with a prior team. If you look at Goff's performance in the last 4 games, all wins, by the way, he's now, if I did my math right, 76 of 91 passing for a ridiculous 83% completion percentage. And the crazy thing is, he came into today in the prior 3 wins against the Cardinals, Seahawks, and Cowboys. He came in at 82% completion percentage in those 3 games. Actually, 81.8. I only know that specifically because I had done the calculation like a week ago. Today, he somehow improved upon an 81.8% completion rate. That's insane, if you ask me, against a defense that was 3rd in the NFL in scoring in terms of points per game allowed. Now, for the year, I believe Goff is at 73.5% completion percentage. I went and did the calculation myself because I couldn't find a site that updates their stats instantly. I think he's got 10 or maybe 11 touchdowns against 4 interceptions so far for the year. If he keeps playing at this rate, I think he's got to be put into the conversation for MVP. And I understand that Lions fans, some of you may recoil at something like that. But if he keeps playing at this, particularly next week against the Titans, and I'll get to that here in a moment, the Lions have scored 42, 47, and now 31 points in their last 3 weeks. And they just dropped 30 on the road against a Brian Flores defense that so many other people, at least evaluators or analysts, were almost damn near scared of. And Jared Goff and Ben Johnson go in there and just basically did the same thing they did last year, which is drop 30 on them. Now, don't get me wrong. The division looks like either the best in football or among the best. Right now, Goff and Ben Johnson are just slicing up NFL defenses no matter where they play and no matter how highly rated those teams are. It's worth talking about how much of a tear he's on. I would like to do a long film study video this week on Jared Goff's play. Actually, already did one a couple of weeks ago. They're coming home 5-1, and they're facing a Titans team that you may think is not a threat. And I'm not saying that they really are to come into Detroit and get a win, but I have a little bit of knowledge about their defensive coordinator and the style and type of defense they play. If Goff can continue this in their game against the Titans, look, Denard Wilson is their defensive coordinator. You may not know who that is. He was Ravens DB's coach last year. Before that, he was with Philly. Go look at his coaching trajectory and where he's been, what has happened each year, wherever he's been. He was with the Eagles the year they made the Super Bowl and lost to the Chiefs. He was with the Ravens in 2023. Both of those teams, incredibly efficient and effective coverage teams in terms of yards allowed per game when he was there. Eagles in 2022, Ravens in 2023. And look at what happened to the passing defenses of those teams once he left. The bottom has fallen out in Baltimore. In case you don't know, we are one of the worst in the league in terms of passing yards allowed. This year in Tennessee, yes, they've only won one football game. They allow 137 passing yards per game coming into this week, their game against the Bills, I should say. If Goff can carve up that Titans defense in the same manner, just go in there, ho-hum, 22 of 25, 280 and 2 touchdowns, I think it's time to start talking about him being a possible MVP candidate on a team with a whole bunch of really, really good football players. That might seem to be a little bit too intense of a prospect for Jared Goff, but I think he's playing that well, particularly in the last 4 weeks. Detroit leads the league in scoring. It's going to be fun to watch the film, the All-22, whenever it does come out. Sometimes it's Sunday night, oftentimes Monday morning. I appreciate you guys' time. Let me know what you think of the video in the comment section, some of the thoughts that I had about the game, how well Ben Johnson and Jared Goff have attacked this Brian Flores defense in the last 3 games. I think Flores has got some adjustments to make in this specific matchup, maybe not against multiple other teams in the NFL. The timing-oriented nature of what Goff gets done against the zone defenses that he predominantly played today just wasn't a good mix. Appreciate you guys' time, man. If you think other Lions fans would enjoy this game reaction, albeit a very lengthy one, then please consider grabbing a link to this video, sharing it out on social media to help this content get more reach.